There comes a moment in life, quiet, unannounced, and deeply unsettling, when the avoidant realizes something has changed, not outside of them but within. The messages have stopped, the explanations are no longer demanded, the emotional negotiations have ended. And in that stillness, something terrifying happens. The mirror appears. You see, the avoidant is comfortable in distance. Distance feels safe. Distance feels powerful. Distance creates the illusion that nothing can touch the carefully constructed walls around the heart. But what the avoidant never prepares for is this moment. The moment when the other soul no longer knocks on the door. At first there is relief. Good, the mind says. I have my space. But space, when it stretches too far, turns into emptiness. And emptiness has a voice. This is where the first crack forms. Stage 1 is confusion. Not dramatic, not emotional, just a subtle disorientation. The avoidant notices the absence but refuses to name it. They tell themselves they are fine, they distract, they stay busy, yet something feels off. The power dynamic has shifted, and they don't understand how. Stage 2 is irritation, because now the silence feels unfamiliar. The chase used to validate their worth without requiring vulnerability. And when that validation disappears, the ego becomes restless. Thoughts arise uninvited. Why didn't they try harder? Why did they stop? This irritation is not about you, it is about the loss of emotional supply. Then comes stage 3, reflection. And this is dangerous territory for the avoidant, because reflection removes the escape routes. In the quiet moments, late nights, empty drives, still rooms, the mind begins replaying memories. Not just what you did, but what they didn't. The love that was offered, the chances that were deflected, the depth that was avoided. This is where the illusion of control begins to crumble. Stage 4 is anxiety, because now the avoidant senses something irreversible. They realize you didn't give up in weakness, you gave up in clarity, and clarity cannot be manipulated. Anxiety rises when they understand they can no longer return to the old dynamic. The door is not slammed shut, but it is no longer open on demand. Stage 5 is grief, not always conscious, not always acknowledged, but real. This grief is not just about losing you, it is about confronting a lifetime of emotional distancing, a pattern, a story, a self-image built on "I don't need anyone," now exposed as "I didn't know how to stay." Grief humbles the ego. Stage 6 is internal collapse. This is not chaos, it is surrender. The avoidant realizes that running did not protect them, it isolated them. The walls they built did not keep pain out, they kept love out. And when love leaves quietly, it leaves behind truth, raw, undeniable truth. And finally, stage 7, awakening or repetition, because collapse can lead to wisdom, or it can lead back to the same cycle with a different face. This is the divine crossroad. Awareness whispers, feel this, learn from this, become present. Ego shouts, run again. You see, your silence was not punishment, it was alignment. Your letting go was not rejection, it was self-respect. And in divine balance, when one soul chooses wholeness, the other is forced to confront fragmentation. You didn't cause their collapse, you revealed it, like light entering a dark room, exposing what was always there. So if you ever wonder whether your absence mattered, understand this. Growth is often triggered not by pursuit, but by peace, not by begging, but by boundaries, not by words, but by stillness. And whether the avoidant awakens or repeats the cycle is no longer your responsibility. Your role was never to save them. Your role was to choose truth over attachment. And in doing so, you didn't lose them. You found yourself. Avoidance is often mistaken for strength because it wears the costume of independence. It speaks with confidence, moves with certainty, and claims self-sufficiency as its highest virtue. But look closely, and you will see that avoidance is not courage. It is fear that has learned how to stand upright. It is fear that has trained itself to sound rational, logical, and controlled. True strength moves toward truth. Avoidance moves away from it. The avoidant learns early that distance feels safer than closeness. Closeness demands exposure, and exposure demands honesty. To be emotionally present is to risk being seen, and to be seen is to risk rejection, loss, or disappointment. So the avoidant builds a philosophy around self-reliance, convincing themselves that needing less makes them stronger. But needing less does not make you free, it makes you numb. Fear does not always tremble. Sometimes it organizes itself. Sometimes it becomes disciplined, articulate, and emotionally efficient. Avoidance becomes a system. Limit expectations, control attachment, disengage before depth forms. From the outside, this looks like emotional mastery. From the inside, it is a constant state of self-protection. Strength does not require constant defense. Fear does. What the avoidant calls independence is often an inability to tolerate emotional uncertainty. Love is uncertain. Connection is unpredictable. Vulnerability has no guarantees. And rather than learning how to sit with that uncertainty, the avoidant chooses withdrawal. They do not trust the process of connection, so they trust distance instead. Distance gives the illusion of control, but it also starves the soul. Fear disguised as independence thrives on narratives. I don't need anyone. I work better alone. Emotions complicate things. These statements sound empowered, but they are often shields. They are ways of preemptively rejecting before being rejected. Ways of leaving before being left. The avoidant does not avoid love because they do not want it. They avoid it because they want it deeply and do not trust it to stay. Strength is not the absence of fear, it is the willingness to move forward despite it. Avoidance moves backward while calling it wisdom. It confuses emotional distance with maturity and emotional detachment with peace. But peace is spacious, not empty. Detachment without awareness is not enlightenment. It is suppression. When fear drives independence, relationships become transactional rather than transformative. People are allowed into one's life only to a certain depth, only as long as they do not threaten the inner walls. Anything that asks for emotional accountability feels intrusive. Anything that requires presence feels demanding. And so the avoidant maintains control by keeping one foot out the door at all times, yet control is expensive. It costs intimacy. It costs growth. It costs the possibility of being deeply known. Fear-based independence avoids pain, yes, but it also avoids joy. It avoids healing. It avoids the sacred friction that shapes character and reveals truth. Divine wisdom does not ask you to eliminate fear, it asks you to face it with awareness. The paradox is this: the avoidant believes distance keeps them safe, but it is distance that keeps them unfulfilled. The heart was not designed to live behind walls, it was designed to expand. Strength expands, fear contracts. One moves toward life, the other negotiates with it from afar. Avoidance is not power, it is unfinished courage, and the moment fear is seen clearly, without judgment or denial, its disguise dissolves. What remains is not weakness, but the invitation to grow. When you stop chasing, something fundamental shifts in the emotional universe between you and the avoidant. The chase was never just movement, it was energy, attention, and validation flowing in one direction. As long as you pursued, explained, reassured, and reached out, the avoidant could remain distant without consequence. Your effort became the cushion that softened their detachment. When that cushion disappears, reality arrives unfiltered. The illusion of control is built on predictability. The avoidant felt in control because they knew you would return, ask, clarify, and try again. Even withdrawal became a form of power because it triggered pursuit. Distance was their lever. When you stop chasing, that lever breaks. For the first time, they are left alone with the outcome of their behavior, not buffered by your emotional labor. At first, they may interpret your absence as temporary. The mind looks for familiar patterns. Surely you will reach out again. Surely this silence is another pause before pursuit resumes. But as time stretches and the pattern does not repeat, uncertainty creeps in. Control thrives on certainty, and now certainty is gone. This is when discomfort begins. The avoidant often believed they were choosing distance. But what they were actually choosing was a reaction. Your response gave meaning to their withdrawal. Without your reaction, their distance loses its function. Silence no longer feels strategic, it feels empty. The power they thought they held was never internal, it was borrowed from your willingness to stay engaged. When you stop chasing, the emotional balance resets. The avoidant can no longer define the rhythm of connection. They can no longer disappear and return without cost. This loss of control is not about dominance, it is about accountability. For the first time, they must face the truth that connection requires mutual presence, not unilateral terms. Your stillness becomes a mirror. In the absence of pursuit, the avoidant begins to feel what you once felt: uncertainty, longing, and unanswered questions. This role reversal is not revenge, it is balance. Energy follows attention, and when attention is withdrawn, awareness has nowhere to hide. What unsettles the avoidant most is not losing you. It is losing the narrative they told themselves about who they were in the dynamic. They believed they were independent, unbothered, in control. But your disengagement reveals a deeper truth. Control depended on your compliance. Without it, their emotional structure wobbles. The illusion of control also masked vulnerability. As long as you chased, they did not have to choose. They did not have to risk closeness or risk loss. They could remain in between. When you stop chasing, the in-between collapses. Now there are only two options: step forward or remain alone with the consequences of distance. This is why your absence speaks louder than any explanation ever could. Words invite debate. Silence invites introspection. Your refusal to chase is not abandonment, it is self-respect, and self-respect disrupts dynamics built on imbalance. There is a divine principle at work here. What is not reciprocated must eventually be released. Energy that flows only one way becomes distortion. When you step back, you are not taking power, you are returning it to its rightful owner. The avoidant must now carry their own emotional weight. And in that moment, the illusion shatters. They realize control was never about distance, it was about avoiding the risk of being fully present. When you stop chasing, presence becomes the only remaining path. Silence has a way of stripping life down to its essentials. It removes the noise that allows avoidance to survive. When words stop coming, when explanation cease, when emotional bids are no longer made, the avoidant is left alone with something far more confronting than conflict: themselves. Silence does not accuse, yet it exposes. It becomes a mirror that reflects unresolved wounds with unsettling clarity. The avoidant often relies on external movement to stay disconnected from internal truth. Conversations, distractions, surface-level interactions, and even controlled arguments serve a purpose. They keep the deeper questions at bay. As long as something is happening, something can be avoided. Silence, however, removes the escape routes. There is no one to react against, no dialogue to manage, no emotional terrain to navigate. Only awareness remains. In silence, the mind begins to replay moments that were once dismissed. Not the dramatic memories, but the subtle ones. The pauses, the missed chances to speak honestly, the moments when connection was offered and gently declined. These memories arise not as punishment, but as reminders. Silence gives them room to surface. It forces the avoidant to feel what was postponed. What makes silence so powerful is that it does not demand change. It simply reveals reality. There is no argument to win, no version of events to defend. The avoidant cannot rationalize their way out of stillness. Without the other person's voice filling the space, the inner voice grows louder, and that voice begins asking uncomfortable questions. Why did I pull away? What was I protecting? What did I lose by staying distant? Unresolved wounds thrive in noise. They hide behind busyness and distraction. Silence removes these hiding places. Old fears of abandonment, inadequacy, loss of control begin to surface. The avoidant may feel restless, agitated, or unsettled without understanding why. This discomfort is not caused by the silence itself, but by what the silence reveals, the mirror of silence reveal. ECTs, patterns, not just one relationship. It shows a history of emotional withdrawal, a repeated strategy of distance. The avoidant may begin to recognize how often closeness was met with retreat, how vulnerability was delayed or denied. This recognition can be painful, because patterns challenge identity. They suggest that avoidance was not a one-time choice, but a conditioned response. Silence also removes the fantasy of emotional neutrality. The avoidant may have believed that staying distant meant staying unaffected. But silence reveals that detachment does not eliminate feeling, it only delays it. In the absence of external engagement, emotions resurface with greater intensity. Longing, regret, curiosity, and even grief may arise unexpectedly. What makes this mirror divine in nature is its neutrality. Silence does not judge, it does not shame, it does not chase. It simply reflects. And reflection is the beginning of awareness. In spiritual wisdom, awareness is the doorway to transformation. One cannot heal what one refuses to see. The avoidant may initially resist this mirror, filling the silence with distractions. But silence has patience. It waits. And when distractions fade, the mirror remains. It invites responsibility, not in blame, but in ownership. Ownership of one's emotional habits, ownership of the distance created. In this way, silence becomes an initiation. It confronts the avoidant with the truth that connection cannot be maintained through absence, love cannot grow where presence is withheld, and wounds cannot heal where they are never acknowledged. Silence does not force awakening, but it makes avoidance visible, and once something is truly seen, it cannot be unseen. Growth does not begin with understanding alone, it begins with surrender. The avoidant may analyze, rationalize, and intellectually grasp their patterns, yet remain unchanged. Awareness without surrender becomes another form of control. It allows the ego to observe itself without releasing its grip. True growth starts only when the ego loosens its hold on the narratives it uses to protect itself. The ego survives by maintaining identity. For the avoidant, this identity often revolves around self-sufficiency, emotional detachment, and independence. These traits are not inherently harmful, but when they become defenses, the ego clings to them as proof of worth. Surrender threatens this identity. It asks the avoidant to admit that what felt like strength was also limitation. Surrender is not collapse and defeat, it is release in truth. It is the moment when the avoidant stops justifying distance and begins to feel its cost. The ego resists this moment fiercely. It prefers explanation over experience, control over connection. Yet growth demands the opposite. It requires stepping into uncertainty without armor. Awareness exposes the pattern, but surrender transforms it. Awareness says, "This is what I do." Surrender says, "I no longer need to be this way." Without surrender, awareness becomes static, observing the wound but never touching it. Divine wisdom teaches that healing occurs not through force, but through allowance. When the ego surrenders, emotional responsibility emerges. The avoidant no longer views vulnerability as a threat, but as a doorway. They stop protecting themselves from imagined dangers and begin engaging with real feelings. This shift is subtle but profound. The nervous system relaxes because it no longer has to maintain constant defense. Surrender also dismantles the illusion of control. Control is the ego's favorite strategy, yet it cannot create connection. Connection requires openness, and openness requires trust. Trust cannot be calculated, it must be allowed. When the avoidant releases the need to manage outcomes, they discover that presence itself is stabilizing. There is a sacred humility in surrender. It acknowledges that growth cannot be engineered from the mind alone. The heart must participate. The avoidant learns that strength is not about holding back, but about staying present when discomfort arises. This presence is transformative because it integrates rather than avoids. As the ego softens, compassion replaces judgment. The avoidant begins to see their patterns not as personal failures, but as learned responses. This compassion creates space for change. Shame contracts, compassion expands. In expansion, growth becomes possible. Surrender also alters how relationships are experienced. Instead of guarding against loss, the avoidant becomes willing to risk connection. This does not guarantee permanence, but it guarantees authenticity. Divine principles favor authenticity over attachment. What is real can evolve. What is controlled eventually breaks. Growth rooted in surrender is not linear, it unfolds in layers. Each layer requires the ego to release another illusion of invulnerability, of self-sufficiency, of emotional immunity. With each release, awareness deepens, and with deeper awareness comes alignment. The moment surrender occurs, the internal collapse transforms into reconstruction. What was falling apart was never the true self, it was the protective shell. Growth begins not when the avoidant understands this, but when they allow it to happen. Thank you for giving your time, presence, and openness to this message. May what resonated continue to unfold within you. Goodbye for now, and may clarity, courage, and inner alignment guide your path forward. And so, as this understanding settles within you, remember this: not every ending is a loss, and not every silence is empty. Some silences are sacred, some endings are awakenings. When you choose to stop chasing what cannot meet you, you are not giving up. You are returning to yourself. And in that return, something divine happens. You break cycles, you restore balance, and you allow truth to stand where illusion once lived. Whether another awakens or not is no longer your burden. Your responsibility is alignment, presence, and honoring the wisdom that knows when to stay and when to release. Growth always begins the moment you choose self-respect over struggle, clarity over confusion, and peace over proving your worth. Thank you for listening with an open heart and a willing spirit. May these words continue to echo where they are needed most. Goodbye for now, and may your journey forward be guided by awareness, courage, and inner peace.